Buckle up, kids, because there is a lot of information to cover here. Aimed at both newbie capture artists as well as veterans, I can promise you that there are at least 2 things you didn't know before you started this video. A few examples of things that we will be covering. No-clip camera functions. Locking your Warframe's orientation while moving from a detached camera. Accessing multiple saved shot settings without leaving Captura mode. Warframe and operator shots both in idle animations. Removing Warframe weapons mid-weapon animation pose. Clipping out of scenes now that the Hydroid clip is patched. As well as many other things. This may not be a very short guide, but it is the most in-depth one you will ever find, as it's not a personal showcase pretending to be a guide, but an actual guide being a guide. And now that we've got your attention, welcome to Vash and PurpleFlurp's Guide to Captura in 2022. You may be tempted to skip ahead to see certain things at certain parts, but I strongly advise you watch the entire video, as most parts will include at least one thing people didn't know. So let's start with the absolute basics. What is Captura? Captura is an in-game photography mode in Warframe. You can access it by going to your arsenal, clicking on the appearance tab of your Warframe, and then up in the top right there is a camera icon you can click. Once you click on this, you'll be presented with all the scenes that you presently own. Scenes can be obtained from in-game missions, they can be obtained from faction syndicates, open world factions. Almost every scene is tradable, meaning you can buy them off the market as well if need be. We'll touch more on scenes later, but for now, let's talk about controls. Depending on your console, these controls will vary, but for the sake of the video, I'm going to keep all the controls in a PC scheme. When you are in a Captura scene, you can press G to enter FreeCam. FreeCam unbinds the camera from your Warframe and allows you to move it around freely. You still have the same control scheme as your Warframe would, except you have the additions of E and Q to tilt your camera as well. You can use left shift for faster camera movement to cover greater distances more quickly, or you can use right mouse button to slow the camera movement for more accurate positioning. You can press T to advance time while you are in Captura mode, since when you do enter free camera, it will pause time for the Warframe and the scene. F6 exists, but none of you should use it. This is the game's built-in screenshot function. The only time you should ever use this is if you're submitting a bug report. It is going to compress the ever-loving crap out of your file, and your picture is going to come out looking like trash. If you're not sure of what you should use, even control print screen is going to be fine, unless you have multiple monitors. That's kind of annoying. However, Light Shot is my recommendation. It is extremely easy to use. I will link a quick guide for people who are unfamiliar with third-party screenshot software, but please make sure that whatever you're using saves your file as an uncompressed PNG. L will hide the UI, and X will enter the Captura settings menu. The first option here is depth of field. It is tied to the depth of field setting in your game settings, and it will not function without it. This setting creates a blur that can be useful, but is mostly discouraged, because if we turn it on here, you'll see it really adds this blurred glare around your Warframe, and it just doesn't look that great. However, if you insist that you will be using this, at least understand how it works. Distance is like a wall. It determines where the field will start. So we will line it up with our Warframe here. Depth determines to or from that distance wall where the field will extend to. So I can either focus on things in front of the wall or behind the wall. Horizon is really more useful for larger scenes like open worlds, but you'll see back here, the things are still kind of in focus, albeit slightly blurred, but if you up horizon all the way, then it will get everything on the horizon as well. All shots simply look better with this off. Next up is exposure, and this is one of the most important settings by far. But this raises the light exposure of the scene. This can also affect the intensity of bloom, and the higher the exposure is, the more intense bloom will be. Both exposure and bloom, along with scene lighting, should be different in every single shot you take. Some scenes do have broken exposure though, so just be conscious of that while you experiment. Field of view is another very key setting for your shots. Field of view will change your field of view for the shot, but it entails a lot more than you would think at a glance. High field of view will distort your shots to no end, basically. It turns this sword into a giant curved schlong. Every time I see a shot like this, all I can think of is God build Rex level 9,999 enemies. Gas is back. Shots like this do not look good. For the most part, you should slide field of view all the way down, and it just adds entire other level of detail and depth to the shot. It looks more accurate, things don't get blurred on the edges, it's just all around significantly better. Sometimes you may have to tweak the field of view just to include a little bit more, but otherwise your field of view should be as low as it can go or close to it. In very tight spaces, it may be tempting to up your field of view a lot in order to get your entire subject in your shot. However, that is not necessary necessary anymore with the use of the noclip camera. We'll touch on that later. Next, we're going to talk about filters. Filters are tied to the color correction setting in your game settings. This will not function unless that is enabled. Filters can differentiate your shots from the norm by altering the given colors of both the scene and your subject. Here's a few examples. They will give different hues or alterations to the scene. These are best used in moderation as you don't want to fry your shot. Filter opacity will determine the strength of the filter against your screen, and then filter depth will actually change how far out from behind the subject your filter will reach. Low depth will affect everything you see, and high depth will affect only a portion of the background, if any at all. You can use this to, say, turn the background black and white while your Warframe stays in color. Reversing the filter depth changes the direction from which the filter starts and approaches. So the filter normally will start from behind your Warframe and come towards your camera, but if you reverse it, it will come from your camera towards your Warframe. This way you can reverse and, say, get your Warframe black and white, but your background still in color. Grain is tied to the film grain setting in your settings, and is by far one of the worst settings in the history of mankind. Even if you have this turned off, by the way, there's always going to be one tick of grain that you have to click off each time you go into Captura. It is extremely annoying, but here's what grain does in case anyone is actually dented in the skull and wants to know. Who would want this? Next up is saturation. This alters the color saturation of your shots. The higher the saturation is, the more intense colors will be. But the lower the saturation is, the more dulled colors will become. So this will eventually turn things to pretty much black and white. Oddly enough, saturation will only affect what your filter depth is set to cover. Even if your filter is set back to neutral, if you have any filter depth on the slider, it will only change what was set within that depth. So be sure that if you are done with filters, or if you're not using them, you turn the opacity and depth all the way down. Look at character will force the camera to look at the midsection of your Warframe. Really isn't terribly useful. It's best not to click it, and it also just makes it look at your Warframe's junk, and that's kind of awkward. Detach Camera, however, is extremely useful. By default, if you exit the Captura settings and move to your Warframe, the camera will always return to the Warframe's binding. But with this, if you enable Detach Camera, the camera will stay in its position even after you return to your Warframe. This is neat if you want to keep your angle but change frames. You can go into Arsenal without losing your shot angle. You can also use this with advanced times, so as long as you're holding T, you can use your arrow keys or WASD to move your Warframe, and it won't turn, and it won't lose your camera orientation as well. This is extremely useful for repositioning your Warframe in sensitive shots. You can also use Detach Camera in conjunction with Look at Your Character to return to your Warframe and have it run around, and the camera will stay in its same position, but it will always orient itself to follow your Warframe as well. Advanced Camera is an amazing tool to help you take cinematics in Captura. However, this does deserve its own entire video. Granted, it does have useful applications for general Captura. Even if you don't take cinematics, pay attention to this because you may want to utilize this. When you're in Advanced Camera, you have the option to place cameras. You'll click Add Camera, and then you can, adjust settings, get it in its position, and then press X to confirm the camera position. Once you've done this, this saves that camera with that setting at that orientation. So if you haven't put two and two together by now, you can add as many cameras as you want, at as many angles as you want, with whatever settings that you want. And then you can click on each camera to snap to those angles with those settings and have different shots. If you leave Advanced Camera after having clicked on one of those shots, it's going to retain the orientation so you can still take your shot. This is extremely useful because even if you accidentally hit escape, the camera position is saved. So you can just go back into Advanced Camera settings, click on the camera, and it will snap back to your original position. If you would like to learn more about cinematics and how to do them with the full use of the Advanced Camera, I will have a video linked in the top right of the screen as soon as it comes out. Text is a function that allows you to add text to your scene. You can click Create New Text, after which you will be prompted to enter text. After you're done, you can hit OK and it will appear on the scene relative to your camera position and orientation. You can click Edit the Text to change that specific text, or you can reposition it by clicking Reposition after you have moved your camera or oriented it differently. Whatever angle your camera is at is the angle your text will be placed at as well. Unfortunately, there is no way to set a distance from which the camera will place text. It's always going to be that same distance away. You can change the text size with the slider, and you can also change the colors if you'd like to make a 7th grade PowerPoint presentation, or remove text after clicking. Colors are determined by your color palettes as well. You can keep making text up to 5 separate placements, and you can alternate between between the currently selected text by clicking currently selected text. When utilized with text codes, this allows for some very, very interesting shots. If you'd like to learn more about that and advanced Captura once you're done with the video, I have the video explaining in the top right of the screen. Slow motion will, as you would guess, slow motion when you advance time while in your camera or if you return to your Warframe. This will even slow the animation of your escape menu, so if you don't want it on, make sure it's off. This can be extremely useful though if you're trying to catch a very specific micro pose from an animation set. You'll be able to catch it without cursing your ancestors as it went too fast and you have to wait eons to get that hip thrust or weapon twirl again. This can also be used to make micro adjustments to your frame's positioning. Say you try to turn your frame to the left just a little bit on normal speed. Your frame will turn quite a bit. However, if you have slowed motion on, your frame will only turn a fraction if you feather tap the movement. This can also be used to rotate a frame mid-animation as well. It's advised that if you are trying to feather tap to get a very specific frame, or if you're trying to rotate in the middle of an animation, that you detach the camera beforehand so that way you don't have to lose your position, and then also that you change the slow motion to the lowest setting of 0.1 times speed. Advanced time is identical to how it works in FreeCam, except you have the additional option to toggle advanced time. Funnily enough, adaptive exposure is tied to time, meaning that if you view a dark area and the lighting brightens to accommodate, and then you pause time and look elsewhere, it's going to keep the brightened exposure for everything that you look at. Adaptive exposure will only correct itself after you have advanced time while looking at your desired light to adjust to. This can be neat for making things a bit darker if you need to, by looking at a bright light to darken the exposure, and then pausing and looking back to your subject. Some scenes lack or have broken exposure settings, so utilizing this artificially adjusted exposure can sometimes be your only way to change it on those scenes. Friendly fire can be enabled to kill your friends, basically. Captura can actually be a multiplayer activity. You can invite your friends, up to 8 people total, including yourself, to go into a Captura scene, or you can invite them to the scene itself. This can enable targeted ability use on allies in the scene, but keep in mind that if you are trying to get a whole bunch of people in to do the same animation all lined up next to each other, animations are client-based, meaning that they'll see you do an animation on their screen, but you won't see your Warframe doing anything on yours. Cooperative Captura shots can be a royal pain in the ass sometimes because of this. Enable self-knockdown enables you to get knocked down. There isn't usually a whole lot of appeal for this, except you can get some really neat knockdown animations to help you with some nifty shots. Select Captura Scene lets you change Captura scenes without going all the way back to your arsenal again. Post-capture dialogue, you really don't have to worry about unless you're using the F6 capture like a fool. But if you do use it, then all this does is simply pop up a little message that lets you know that you successfully took a screenshot. Spawn enemies. Now this one has a bit to it. The spawn enemy function functions identically to the simulacrum. You can spawn enemies that you've completed codex scans for at levels determined by your mastery rank. Enemies can still be affected by statuses, abilities, and they can still die. If you want enemies to survive a few hits while you try to get the right shot with them, it's advisable to make them the highest level you can get, in addition to taking off or switching to an unmodded loadout for your frame and your weapons. The kill enemy function will instantly kill all spawned enemies on the scene. If time is paused, you'll notice that they will immediately lose their weapons if they actually had any. Once time is resumed or slowly advanced, they'll move to collapse and eventually their bodies will fade. However, if you did kill an enemy with a slash weapon, they'll leave behind blood stains when their bodies are gone. There is a limit of 3 enemies max you could have on any given scene, but some scenes have native enemies, like the Orb Valis has the Orb Mothers that are basically part of the maps, so you can only spawn 1 enemy as the Orb Mothers count towards your limit. Some scenes are also areas where even in-game you'd never encounter an enemy there, so you can't spawn one there either. As for enemy placement, rarely the enemies you spawn will spawn on top of your Warframe, which is convenient if you want to place them there. Most commonly though, they'll be placed randomly throughout the scene or halfway across the map. You can move enemies though by using Switch Teleport Loki. Enemies will adopt the orientation of your Loki before your teleport, so not only can you move them, you can choose how they'll be turned. Pause AI will stop the animation or function of the enemies themselves. If it's enabled when they're spawned, they will spawn in a resting unalerted pose, and they won't move even if you attack them, just like Simulacrum. You can unpause enemies or spawn them in with it disabled, and they'll spawn in unalerted until they see you, after which they will try to attack you. This is neat because if you pause an enemy while they're in the middle of an animation, be it running or attacking you, it will actually cause them to loop the animation. So for example, if you pause them while running, they'll run in place. But if you pause them while they're trying to melee you, they'll keep meleeing you and targeting you. Most often they'll actually move a little bit to try and get to you, but they will keep attacking. This is neat if you're trying to get a specific enemy animation in your shot. Some enemies are pretty unique though, meaning that you can use specific enemies to spawn more enemies. Some enemies will do things in Captura that they shouldn't, and a good example is the Dargon. It's not something that you should be able to spawn in any Captura scene. If you go to spawn a Dargon, nothing will happen. It will simply explode in the millisecond that it existed. But if you jump up and enter free cam and then spawn the Dargon, you now have a vehicle in any Captura scene that you would like. Alright, now we're going to get onto the 3-light setup, but before we do, if you have enjoyed this video or found any of the information thus far useful, consider subscribing and giving Flurp a follow on any of his social medias I will have linked below. So 3-light setup. This is an integral part of good Captura. Every shot should have this. To cover the settings, we have main, fill, and rim lights for the lighting, and brightness determined for each one. And then we have the rotation, which will rotate it as well. Scene light is essentially part of the 4-light setup that should be adjusted as well for every shot that you touch. Some scenes will also come with the following options unique to the scenes themselves. These aren't always part of the 3-light setup, but they're important to know about, and sometimes they'll change how lighting will cast or react in your scene. Open worlds will usually have the time of day setting. This is a huge tool, as it can change the direction and color of the inherent scene lighting entirely. Rain is an option on some scenes. This will add gloss to your subject and your scene. You need to advance time for this to take effect though, similar to adaptive exposure. And then unique to the color key scene, there is an option to change the room color. This will allow you to quite literally just change the background to whatever you'd like and help you maybe achieve green screen edits if you're going for that kind of deal. The lights around your Warframe will display at different angles, but they will always follow your Warframe no matter where you move it. If you're unfamiliar with the angle at which these are displayed, a helpful trick is to change the main, fill, and rim to red, green, and blue respectively, and then rotate it so you know where each source is hitting. The main light should mimic the main light source from the scene. This doesn't have to be the biggest light on the scene, but rather the most noticeable light within your shot. If you have a big light overhanging in the background, consider matching the main light color and brightness so it makes sense compared to the scene. You may have to reposition your Warframe to accommodate this at times, since judging accurate lighting is a large part of taking great shots. An easy way to make sure that main light is being cast in the right direction is to mute fill and rim light and rotate until the main lighting makes sense. The fill light is smaller than the main in the area it can cover, but it is meant to add a little more off-cast color lighting to your subject. This should not be the same color as the primary lighting from the scene, but rather maybe a reflected light from objects nearby in the scene. Watch for bloom light flares on your screen in case additional light sources from the scene are leaving signs that you should match fill light to them. The rim light covers the least amount of area on your subject and should be utilized if there is an obscure light source in the background to add, you guessed it, rim lighting. Alternatively, you can use it to add light from a light source that may or may not exist on the scene. However, your shots will not suffer if you neglect to use this lighting overall. The 3 lights should not cast even light on the subject. Main light should have the most influence, fill as needed, and then rarely rim. Scene light may as well be a part of this, as if it's low, you lose native lighting and scene detail, and if it's too high, you blow up your shots. Turning this down can result in some neat minimalistic shots that can be offset with the 3-light setup. Balancing scene light with exposure is a large part of getting good shots as well. Next to the 3-light setup, those two are going to be adjusted the most in your endeavors. Turning down the scene light a touch can result in increased focus on your subject from the slight loss of detail in the background and puts more emphasis on the 3-light setup. Some scenes have inherent lighting that you cannot remove, even if you diminish the scene light. An example would be Fortuna. You get purples, blues, and pinks pretty much everywhere on the scene. But meanwhile, the color key scene has no native lighting whatsoever. Now that we have the information, putting it into practice is another story entirely. You'll notice I still have my 3-light setup on from another attempt in this same scene. I didn't quite like where it was going, so I decided to move positions and find a different area that could maybe work with the light that I wanted. First things first, I need to get the animation that I wanted back. Now it's not quite in the right angle, so I'm going to look into changing it with slow motion to alter my Warframe's orientation, like we talked about earlier. Now that is a position that could work. I looked into framing it against the light source itself, but that wasn't going to pan out too well. I determined that with the type of light that was being cast overhead, I could afford to simply turn off the scene light entirely. This is an example of native lighting that will not go away even if you diminish the scene light. Then I know I want blue, so the other lights are muted at this point, and I rotate it until I can find a lighting rotation that agrees with the light being cast overhead. This is where I end up lowering the frame in comparison to the door, and then I reframe the head against the sides of the door as well. So that way the background is telling you this is where this frame should go. And the background isn't so busy that it's taking away from the focus of the frame either. I end up playing with the light so I can match the intensity of the overcast light above. And then I look into just barely adding a little bit of yellow / gold orange to the scene. I play with doing it a little bit brighter, but then I opt for barely noticeable, simply because if there is a gold-ish brown light from behind the camera, it's obviously not so bright that it's shining on the door behind the Warframe. I look into rim light a little bit, but as usual, rim light doesn't really have a huge part to play, and instead opt for the barely noticeable fill light. In the end, I end up changing the yellow to go down just a touch. And at this point, we have a decent shot. We have a frame in a good pose with good lighting, and then we have a background behind it framing and complementing the position of the frame itself. Now we're going to start going over good practices, because there's a lot that can go on behind the scenes before you even enter Captura that helps make a great scene. And the first of which is picking a theme. Finding a scene to match your randomly colored Warframe is a lot harder than coloring your frame to match a scene. If you're going to pick a theme, then pick one, find your colors, and then find a scene you can fit. For example, Corpus scenes you can color based off of Corpus weapons. If you can manage to find a coherent theme with a scene to go with it, you are going to have a much easier time trying to come up with a good shot. If you need to find colors, you can save yourself time and use warframecolorpicker.app. This will let you, say you have a melee weapon and you want to get the colors from the default melee weapon or maybe from its skin, you can convert the colors to its attachment, and then you can take a screenshot of the attachment colors and post it here. And this will tell you each color and the nearest approximate color within game from an existing color palette. And then if you don't have the color palette it suggests that is the closest by the percent amount, it will also give you thereabout approximations. It also allows you to enter a hex code from a color that you may have seen elsewhere if you, say, used Color Picker to extract the hex code itself, and then it will tell you the nearest approximate color based on the hex code you have given. This is an insanely useful tool, and if you're ever not sure about colors, I highly recommend this app with all my heart and soul. And then lastly is to consider your background. Try to find angles for your shots that either frame your target or don't dilute it. If the background is too busy, if it has too much going on and it has too much attention drawn to it, this will take away from what people should be looking at. If you can't get a background that is simple or framed, then at least try to make sure you fade it so the subject is the focus of your picture. An example would be, earlier before the shot that I gave as an example, I was trying to make it work with the wall, but the wall just was not a great background, and then the red dots were just kind of conflicting with everything that I already had going on, and so then I ended up relocating in the scene to try and find a better shot, resulting in the scene that you saw as the example. Now we're going to talk about camera and posing, along with tips and tricks for each. When it comes to your camera, vertical shots are something that are really simple that also happen to look really good. Don't be one of the people that asks, how do you maintain a high resolution while cropping, just because you didn't think to press E or Q and rotate the camera and have a vertical shot instead. Another neat thing is clipping out of scenes and doors to get to other areas to have different kinds of shots. A one-size-fits-all clipping method is to switch to Titania, go to Razor Wing, and then ram yourself into the uppermost corner or region of the door or ridge as far as you can. This doesn't have to be a door, it can be almost anything so long as there is some form of corner to push yourself into. Then, while you are pressing yourself against that corner, enter the arsenal and switch to Wisp. If you can't already just move straight out of that point, use Wisps 2 to ghost forward, and if you're not clipping into a room but rather outside the map, make sure that you activate Arcwing after you teleport so you don't fall off the map. This can be used to access locked doors, for example the Corpus Labs, or get in caves from the Plains of Eidolon, or just in this example of Deimos, there's a lot more going on in the scene than you're able to access. The no-clip camera is achieved after you've already clipped outside of your scene or map, and this is achieved simply by falling off the map. It can be in operator or Warframe form, but after you reset, you will have no-clip capabilities. If you fall off with your operator rather than your Warframe, then you can spare yourself a little bit of fixing, because if you fall off with your Warframe will return completely invisible. If you do fall off with your Warframe instead, you can simply use Wisp 2 to re-instance your Warframe's visibility, or you can activate your K-Drive and that will return it as well. This is by far one of the most useful things we will show you in this video, just for getting shots that are from normally impossible angles, or for getting into extremely tight spaces so you can maintain your low field of view and keep your shot quality. And no, for any decorators, this does not work in the dojo. I tested it. I was disappointed as well. For posing, let's talk about animation sets real quick. Animation sets are different from weapon animation sets. Certain animation sets might have different weapon animations with them, but they are different. So an animation set would be something that your Warframe will do on its own, unprompted, without any weapon in particular to go with it. But if a Warframe has a certain weapon or weapon type equipped, then they will interact with it differently than they would something else. There's already plenty of videos on YouTube that cover animation sets in depth, so if you ever want to look up one in particular, just search it up and someone will definitely have a video for it. And then if you happen to like one of the animations it has and think it might be good for a shot, just go ahead and go to the market and purchase it for your Warframe. Some animation sets do have unique effects, such as Excalibur's Zato will pull out the pipe, Harrow will pull out the lantern, and Wisp has the little ghost that it will spin around with. Now let's talk about ability use for poses and effects. You can slow motion with feather tapped advanced time to catch interesting poses brought on by Warframe ability usage. There's no animation set for those that you can just equip. You just have to use the ability and try to catch an interesting pose. Some abilities also give unique effects that can alter the shots of your subject, such as Ash's Blade Storm, which tints the screen and creates smoke around your Warframe. Banshee's Silence will create circles in the air, and so forth. Some abilities can also carry over to different Warframes if you switch between the arsenal, which Blade Storm does as well. You can cast it on Ash, don't trigger it, and then switch Warframes, and the smoke will carry over. Remember that some of these need color correction in order to function. Blade Storm needs it, and so does Mace's Regulators. Warframe and operator shots are something that are normally impossible to do while keeping your Warframe in its animation set while your operator is out. Normally, when you go into operator form, the Warframe will sit in its "Mom said it's my turn on the Warframe" pose until you return to it. On PC, there is a method where if you can bind a non-looping emote to a hotkey, then switch to operator and use that hotkey immediately after, your Warframe will use the emote, breaking the "My Turn" pose, and return to its animation set after the emote is done. Now you can have both out doing animations. On console, this will still technically work, but you'll have to double bind a function to go with that. Otherwise, the alternative is you can make sure that you have friendly fire enabled. Along with knockdown enabled, switch to operator and then void blast your frame. After it gets back up, it will resume idle animations. The PC method is technically better if you don't want to move your Warframe, but if you don't want to double bind your buttons, then that console method does exist. If you happen to encounter a headlock where your head will no longer turn according to your orientation, that is because you swung your melee weapon. Any melee swing will lock your head orientation until you leave Captura. You can fix this though by activating your K-Drive. There are two ways to remove weapons from your Warframe, and for different purposes and during different times. If you are not in the middle of a pose or a shot, you can equip the codec scanner, and that will have your Warframe look unarmed. This is useful when you want an animation specifically from the Warframe unrelated to weapons. However, let's say that you want a weapon animation set, but you want to remove the weapon from the Warframe. You would turn on slow motion to the lowest setting of 0.1 times speed. You would detach the camera so you don't lose your angle, then exit settings, initiate an emote as fast as you can, and then pause the scene again. The Warframe will have removed its weapon, but will retain its pose. If you happen to want to do Captura for weapons only without the Warframe and the Warframe's hands getting in the way, you can instead, when you're doing the clipping out of the map thing, you can let your Warframe fall. If you let your Warframe fall, it will be completely invisible aside from its ephemera, and then you can take pictures of the weapons. Weapons will be on your back or on your hip if they were set to be visible in your arsenal, but otherwise whatever equipped weapon you have will be out and about by its lonesome. If you're a big fan of greatswords and you want to have a greatsword inside of a regular Warframe animation outside of the weapon animation, unique to the Zenistar, if you have appearance while holstered activated and equip a codec scanner with it in melee mode, the Warframe will return to its default animation set, but the Zenistar will stick to the Warframe's hand. Now let's talk about some unique or broken scenes, because some scenes are borked to hell, and they have unique functions that others simply do not. One example would be sentient scenes, namely the sentient altar, where they have often broken exposure zones, where the exposure doesn't actually work, but as soon as you walk into certain areas on the scene, it will suddenly turn on and function. This scene's native lighting, even when turned off by the way, barely changes how the Warframe is viewed in contrast to the 3-light setup. We've already talked about the color key scene and how that can be used for literal green screens. The orbiter scene is unique because this scene pulls from the current state of your orbiter when it is selected, meaning all color schemes, decorations, etc. will all be in the scene when you enter it. This can result in some pretty friggin' crazy things, but I have an entire entirely different video covering that I have linked earlier as well on Advanced Captura. I will have it linked in the description below, so be sure to watch that if you want to learn how to take advantage of shots like this. The Lotus Chamber scene is all sorts of crazy. If you go up using your operator, then you'll encounter another scene entirely, which is just a blue version of the Lua Nursery scene. Makes you wonder how many extra scenes there might be on existing Captura scenes that we just don't know about. Meanwhile, if you go up in your Warframe and come back down, you will have activated the Apostasy Prologue quest mechanics, in which Lotus and Ballas will appear on the scene. As soon as they leave, this does leave behind the portal effect indefinitely. Now just a review on relevant game settings. If you do want gore enabled, you need to make sure that it is enabled or you're not going to have blood. Then let's address the debate between classic and enhanced graphics engines. While on classic, you may not notice a huge difference, but Warframe skins tend to react poorly in the old lighting. Here's an example of polygons on the Warframe that only occur in classic but do not occur in enhanced. Very specific scenes also have slightly different lighting between the two options, but otherwise it is negligible. The polygons are your biggest issue. As for bloom, every scene treats bloom differently. Some scenes will do terrible things to bloom, while other scenes seem to completely discard it. If you turn it off, you may not have to worry about it, but then your subject's energy channels will be dull, faded, and they'll look like they were painted on. Try to balance bloom to still achieve an actual glow where it's needed, but avoid too many lens flares brought on by it. Brightness and contrast we've already discussed, just adjust these as desired in the game settings and then go from there in the actual Captura settings. Effects intensity is a kind of important one though. This determines how visible ability effects are, and it can also change some ability effects entirely. It's helpful when you want ability poses without being blinded by the energy. Alternatively, you can just change your Warframe's energy, not the emissive by the way, color to black from the smoke palette to negate it as well. Effects intensity can alter atmospheric effects in scenes such as water splashes. Splashes will happen on high intensity, while low intensity has virtually none. GPU particles can be pretty obnoxious depending on the scene or the shot. However, these can be nifty as this setting enables the floating red flakes in Deimos or the snow in Orb Vallis. Color correction, we've already talked about how that's tied to abilities that tint the game. This is also tied to filters. As for motion blur, you should always turn that off. It will just make you miserable. Now, screen resolution. Resolution is not the most important part of Captura. Obviously, yeah, it's neat if you're able to take higher resolution photos, but if your shots suck, all high res is going to do is show how much it sucks in 4K. And then in summary for the game settings, sometimes it can be a good idea to leave and refresh your instance if you edit too many settings while in a scene, as some settings won't actually change until you leave. And lastly, let's talk about third-party editing software, for example, Reshade. Stuff like that technically can help you get some nifty shots, but only if you actually understand how to get good shots to begin with. Reshade doesn't magically make your shots good, and I think too many people don't get that, and they try to use it like a crutch. However, just like higher resolutions, edited garbage is still garbage. You don't need third-party software to do good Captura. And oh my god, we are finally done. I'm starting to lose my voice a touch after all that talking. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, again, please consider subscribing and giving Flurp a follow down below on any of the social media accounts that I will have linked. A small note before we wrap up, it's apparently a point of contention that I was making this guide, but I really don't care. Most of the guides I've seen, including some that came out quite recently, glossed over important information, they weren't catered to a newer audience, and they barely provided any information relevant to experienced Captura artists. Nothing explained things like I wanted to know. So I made it. And a huge, huge thank you to PurpleFlurp for helping me slap this together. I would have been completely lost without him. He brought the vast majority of the information provided here to the table.